Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories, here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. Marcus Reed checked his watch for the third time in 5 minutes. 6:47 a.m. The phone had rung at 6:15, pulling him from dreamless sleep. Sheriff Williams, voice tight. "We've got a missing person in Olympic. Need you here in an hour." 3 years since he'd left the Forest Service, 3 years trying to forget why he'd walked away. But some skills don't rust and certain reputations follow a man. When someone disappeared in Washington's mountains, Marcus Reed was still the first name on every emergency contact list. He finished lacing his boots, checked his pack for the second time. Rope, first aid kit, GPS he rarely used, backup flashlight, water for 2 days. Familiar routine even after so long away from official trails. The drive to Olympic National Park's entrance took 43 minutes through October fog that clung to Highway 101 like cigarette smoke. Marcus parked next to 3 sheriff's vehicles and a search and rescue truck, the kind of gathering that meant someone important was missing or someone had been gone too long. Sheriff Williams approached as Marcus shouldered his pack. Dr. Sarah Chen, 34, botanist from University of Washington, last seen yesterday morning on the Ho River Trail. Her research partner expected her back by 4 p.m. Weather yesterday? Clear until evening. She's experienced, knows the area, had GPS, emergency beacon. Williams handed him a photo. Asian woman, serious eyes, confident smile. Beacon went silent at 2:47 p.m., about 6 miles up the trail. Marcus studied the photo, then the topographical map Williams spread on the hood of his cruiser. Any response to calls? Nothing. We've got a team about 2 miles in, but... Williams paused. That's why we called you. Marcus understood. The official search team would follow protocols, stick to likely paths, but sometimes people didn't follow likely paths. Sometimes the forest kept them for reasons that had nothing to do with getting lost. He started up the Ho River Trail at 7:32 a.m., leaving the other searchers behind within the first half mile. This was where his reputation came from, the ability to move through wilderness like he belonged there, reading signs others missed. The trail followed the river through old-growth forest that predated European settlement. Sitka spruce and western hemlock created a canopy so thick that even at midday the forest floor stayed in perpetual twilight. Moss covered everything, trees, rocks, the ground itself, creating a landscape that absorbed sound and muffled footsteps. Marcus had walked this trail dozens of times during his ranger years. He knew every switchback, every fallen log that served as a bridge, every place where the path split into unofficial routes that led deeper into the wilderness. At mile 2 he stopped. Something was wrong. Not obviously wrong. Not dramatically wrong. Just wrong in the way that made the hair on his neck stand up for no reason he could articulate. Marcus crouched beside the trail, studying the ground. The official search team had passed through here. Boot prints from at least 6 people, probably the rescue team that had gone ahead. But underneath their prints, something else. A partial footprint in soft earth beside a moss-covered log. Small, consistent with Dr. Chen's size 7 hiking boots according to the file. But the print was too perfect, too deliberate, like someone had placed their foot carefully to leave exactly that impression. He stood, scanning the forest around the trail. That's when he noticed the squirrels. There were none. Marcus had spent enough time in these woods to know their rhythms. October mornings should be alive with Douglas squirrels chattering in the canopy, gathering cones for winter storage. The silence was unnatural, like something had scared them into hiding. He continued up the trail, senses sharpening. Every shadow became worth examining. Every sound, or lack of sound, registered in his consciousness. At mile 3, he found the second anomaly. A broken branch about 8 feet up in a young hemlock, snapped clean but still hanging by bark fibers. Too high for Dr. Chen to have broken accidentally, too low for wind damage, too fresh to be from yesterday's supposed clear weather. Marcus examined the break from multiple angles. The splintered wood was pale, indicating it had happened recently, within hours, not days. But more importantly, the branch had been broken from below with deliberate upward force. Someone had grabbed the branch and yanked down hard enough to snap it. Someone tall enough to reach 8 feet without jumping. He pulled out his phone, checked for signal. 2 bars. Enough to send a text to Williams. Found signs. Continuing to beacon location. The response came back immediately. Team Alpha reports nothing unusual so far. Marcus almost smiled. Team Alpha was looking for a lost hiker. He was starting to think they were dealing with something else entirely. He picked up his pace, following the trail as it curved away from the river and began climbing into higher terrain. The fog was lifting, revealing glimpses of snow-capped peaks in the distance, but under the canopy, the light remained dim and filtered. At mile 4, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. Williams. Marcus, we've got a development. Chen's research partner just remembered something. She mentioned feeling like someone was watching her the day before she went missing. Said she saw the same hiker twice on different trails, which struck her as odd. Description? Medium height, dark clothing, baseball cap pulled low. Nothing distinctive, but Marcus. Williams paused. Her research partner also said Chen was excited about something she'd found off the main trail. Some kind of unusual plant growth pattern she wanted to document. Marcus stopped walking. Did she say where? Somewhere past the 5-mile marker, up one of the unofficial trails that branches north. Marcus knew those trails. They led into roadless wilderness that stretched for miles, terrain where someone could disappear completely if they knew what they were doing, or if someone else knew what they were doing. I'm at mile 4 now. We'll check the area. Be careful, Marcus. Something about this doesn't feel right. After ending the call, Marcus stood motionless for several minutes, using a skill he'd developed during his ranger years, the ability to become so still that the forest forgot he was there. It was during these moments that he often detected things his conscious mind had missed. A faint scent caught his attention. Not the clean smell of rain and moss that dominated these woods, but something else. Something that didn't belong. Cologne. Barely detectable, but definitely artificial. Someone wearing cologne had passed this way recently. Dr. Chen wouldn't wear cologne on a research hike. It would interfere with her ability to observe natural scents that might be important to her botanical work. And the search team members wouldn't wear it either. Standard practice in wilderness rescue operations. Someone else had been on this trail. Marcus reached the 5-mile marker at 9:15 a.m. The unofficial trail Williams had mentioned branched off to the north about 50 yards ahead, marked only by a gap in the understory that most hikers wouldn't notice. But before investigating the branch, he needed to find where Dr. Chen's emergency beacon had gone silent. According to his GPS, the last known position was another quarter-mile up the main trail, near a small clearing where researchers often stopped to take photographs and collect samples. Marcus approached the clearing with increased caution. If something had happened to Dr. Chen, this was where it had started. The clearing was roughly 30 feet across, created by a massive cedar that had fallen decades ago and never been removed. The log provided natural seating, and the gap in the canopy allowed enough light for understory plants to flourish. Marcus found Dr. Chen's emergency beacon immediately. It was sitting on the fallen log, perfectly placed, obviously positioned there intentionally. Not dropped, not lost, not broken in a fall, placed. He photographed the beacon from multiple angles before touching it, then carefully picked it up. The device was undamaged, battery indicator showing full charge. Someone had simply turned it off. Now Marcus was certain they weren't dealing with a hiking accident or someone who'd gotten lost. Dr. Chen had either turned off her beacon voluntarily, or someone else had done it for her. He began a systematic search of the clearing, moving in a spiral pattern from the beacon's location outward. Within minutes, he found what he was looking for. Boot prints, 2 sets, one matching Dr. Chen's size 7 hiking boots, the other significantly larger, probably size 11 or 12, with a distinctive lug pattern that Marcus memorized. The prints told a story. Dr. Chen had arrived at the clearing and approached the fallen log, probably to rest or examine something that caught her scientific interest. The larger prints showed someone had been waiting in the tree line on the north side of the clearing. The two sets of prints converged near the center of the clearing, where the soft earth showed signs of disturbance. Not quite a struggle, but definitely some kind of interaction. Then both sets of prints led north, toward the unofficial trail Williams had mentioned. Marcus followed the tracks to the edge of the clearing where they entered the narrow trail that wound upward into dense forest. The prints were clear for the first 100 yards, then the trail became rocky and the tracks disappeared. But Marcus didn't need tracks anymore. He had something better. Every 20 or 30 yards along the trail, he found small signs that someone was deliberately marking their passage. A stone moved slightly out of natural position. A branch bent back and left to point along the trail. A pattern of scratches on a tree trunk. Someone wanted to be followed. Marcus paused, considering the implications. In his experience, people marking their trail in wilderness areas fell into two categories: those who were lost and trying to help rescuers find them, and those who were playing games. Given the deliberately placed beacon and the careful positioning of the markers, this felt like games. The trail climbed steadily for another mile before opening into a second, smaller clearing. This one was natural, created by rocky outcropping that prevented large trees from taking root. The space was maybe 15 feet across, surrounded by thick undergrowth. In the center of the clearing sat a day pack, women's model, university logo patch, the kind a botanist might carry. Marcus approached carefully, scanning the tree line before examining the pack. It was positioned exactly like the beacon had been, too perfectly placed to be accidental. Inside the pack, water bottles half full, energy bars, notebook filled with plant specimens and observations in neat handwriting, camera, GPS unit, turned off, and car keys. Everything a missing person should have with them, organized too neatly to be real. Marcus was studying the notebook when he heard it. A branch snapping, deliberate, heavy footstep on dead wood. He looked up, scanning the tree line, and that's when he saw movement in his peripheral vision. Not a person, just a shadow shifting behind the thick trunk of an old hemlock about 40 yards away. "Dr. Chen?" he called. No response. Marcus closed the notebook, slipped it into his own pack, and called out again. "This is Marcus Reed, search and rescue. If you can hear me, please respond." Still nothing. But the feeling of being watched intensified. Not the paranoid sensation of imagined threats, but the specific certainty that comes from actual experience. Someone was observing him, studying him, evaluating him. Marcus made a decision that went against every protocol he'd learned during his ranger years. Instead of calling for backup or retreating to get help, he stepped toward the tree line where he'd seen movement. "I know you're there," he said, voice carrying clearly in the still air. "If you're Dr. Chen, you're safe now. If you're someone else..." He paused. "Then we need to talk." The forest remained silent for nearly a minute. Then, from somewhere in the thick undergrowth beyond the hemlock, came a slow clapping sound. 3 claps. Pause. 3 more claps. Someone was applauding. "Very good, Mr. Reed." The voice came from a different direction than the clapping, about 20 yards to Marcus's left. Male voice, educated tone, completely calm. "Your reputation is well deserved." Marcus turned toward the voice but saw nothing. Dense undergrowth and massive tree trunks provided perfect concealment for someone who knew how to use them. "Where is Dr. Chen?" "Safe for the moment, though I suspect her current situation would challenge her botanical expertise. She's discovering that some environments are more hostile than others." "What do you want?" A pause. Then, "To see if the stories about you are true. They say you can track anything, find anyone, read the forest like other people read newspapers. I'm curious about such claims." Marcus felt his heart rate increase but kept his voice steady. "You've seen enough. Release Dr. Chen and walk away." "Walk away?" The voice held genuine amusement. "Mr. Reed, I've spent months planning this encounter. Months studying your methods, your cases, your remarkable success rate in finding people who don't want to be found. Do you really think I'd walk away just when things are getting interesting?" The voice had moved again. This time it came from behind Marcus. Impossible given the timing and distance involved. Either there were multiple people or whoever he was dealing with was moving through the forest with skills that matched his own. "You're military," Marcus said, turning slowly to face the new position. "The way you move, the discipline in your voice. Special Forces, probably." "Former Captain David Kellerman, Army Psychological Operations, though I prefer to think of myself as retired." Another pause. "Like you, I left my previous profession due to philosophical differences with my superiors." "Psychological operations." Marcus processed that information. "You manipulate people professionally." "I study human behavior under stress. I identify weaknesses in decision-making processes. I find ways to make intelligent people make stupid choices." The voice was moving again, circling. "It's fascinating work, really. Most people think they're rational, that they make decisions based on logic and evidence, but put them under enough pressure, threaten something they care about, and they revert to pure instinct." Marcus understood now. This wasn't a random kidnapping or even a typical predator situation. This was an experiment, with him as the test subject. Dr. Chen is bait. Dr. Chen is motivation. I needed you to come here to engage with this situation personally, rather than simply calling for backup and waiting for the cavalry. I needed to see how the famous Marcus Reed operates when the stakes are real. And if I don't play your game? Then Dr. Chen becomes a statistic, another academic who ventured too far into the wilderness and never came back. The forest is remarkably good at hiding bodies, as I'm sure you know. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, using another technique from his ranger days, filtering out emotional responses and focusing purely on tactical assessment. He was dealing with someone who had military training, psychological expertise, and months of preparation time. Someone who had studied him specifically and planned this encounter carefully. But everyone had weaknesses, even former psychological operations specialists. "You made a mistake," Marcus said. "Really? Do tell." "You assumed I'd care more about one person's life than about stopping someone like you." For the first time, there was a pause before the response. "Explain." "You're not going to kill Dr. Chen regardless of what I do. If you wanted her dead, she'd already be dead. You need her alive to maintain leverage over me, which means this isn't about her at all. It's about proving something to yourself." Another, longer pause. "Continue. You've convinced yourself that intelligence and planning always defeat instinct and experience. Probably because something happened to you where instinct failed and people died. Now you need to prove that your way is superior, that raw intellect beats intuitive skill." Very perceptive. The voice had shifted again, but this time Marcus caught a glimpse of movement, a figure in dark clothing about 30 yards away, partially concealed behind a massive cedar. "Though your psychological profile of me changes nothing about your current situation. Actually, it changes everything, because now I know you're not going to kill me either. You need me alive to validate your victory, which means I can take risks you don't expect." Marcus started walking toward the cedar tree. "I wouldn't recommend that, Mr. Reed. See, that's your first real mistake. You're trying to control the situation through psychological manipulation instead of direct action. If you were serious about the threat, you'd have already demonstrated consequences." Marcus kept walking. 20 yards from the tree. 15. "Stop. 10 yards. Mr. Reed, I strongly advise—" Marcus broke into a run, covering the last 10 yards in seconds. But when he reached the cedar, no one was there. Just a small digital speaker attached to the trunk, still transmitting. "Clever," came the voice from the speaker. "But predictable. You assumed I was speaking from concealment nearby. Actually, I'm quite comfortable about a quarter mile from your current position, watching you through a rifle scope." Marcus stepped back from the tree, scanning the forest around him. With a good scope and proper concealment, someone could observe this clearing from any of a dozen different elevated positions. "Now you're beginning to understand the nature of our game," the voice continued. "I have advantages you lack. Technology, preparation time, advanced knowledge of the terrain. You have advantages I lack. Wilderness skills, tracking ability, intuitive pattern recognition. What's the point of this? The point, Mr. Reed, is to determine which set of advantages proves superior. I've created a scenario that will test your abilities against mine. Dr. Chen is currently secured in a location that only your particular skills can discover. I've left clues, but they require the kind of interpretation that GPS units and thermal imaging can't provide. The speaker went silent for a moment, then continued. You have until sunset to find her. That gives you approximately 8 hours. If you succeed, both of you are free to leave. If you fail... The voice paused. Well, let's just say that Dr. Chen's current environment becomes increasingly hostile as darkness falls. And if I bring backup, any additional people in this area will be considered a violation of the parameters. Dr. Chen will be moved to a location that even you couldn't find in time. Marcus considered his options. He could hike back to the trailhead, call for a full search and rescue deployment, bring in helicopters and tracking dogs. But if Kellerman was serious about the time limit and the threat to move Dr. Chen, that approach might fail. Or he could play the game, trust his abilities against Kellerman's planning, and try to find Dr. Chen before dark. One more thing, the voice said. I should mention that I'm genuinely impressed by your performance so far. The speed with which you identified the artificial nature of the clues, the accuracy of your psychological assessment, your tactical decision to challenge my position directly, it's exactly what I hoped for. Glad I could entertain you. This isn't entertainment, Mr. Reed. This is research. I'm studying the limits of human intuition when confronted with superior preparation and technology. You represent the pinnacle of intuitive forest skills. I represent the pinnacle of analytical planning. This encounter will demonstrate which approach proves more effective. Marcus realized something that Kellerman probably hadn't intended to reveal. This wasn't the first time. The level of preparation, the sophistication of the setup, the confidence in his voice. Kellerman had done this before. How many people have you tested this theory on? Silence. How many, Kellerman? You're the first to ask that question. Which wasn't an answer, but was information. Marcus filed it away for later consideration. The timer starts now, Kellerman said. Dr. Chen's location can be determined by following the clues I've left, but only if you interpret them correctly. Traditional search methods won't work. You'll need to use those famous instincts of yours. The speaker went dead. Marcus stood alone in the clearing, surrounded by thousands of acres of wilderness, with 8 hours to find a woman whose life depended on his success, against an opponent who had spent months preparing for this exact scenario. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and began to think like a predator instead of a rescuer. Kellerman had said the clues required interpretation that technology couldn't provide. That meant they weren't GPS coordinates or compass bearings, but something more subtle. Environmental signs that only someone with deep wilderness experience would recognize. Marcus began a second, more careful examination of the clearing. This time he wasn't looking for obvious evidence like footprints or disturbed ground. He was looking for patterns that didn't belong. It took him 20 minutes to find the first real clue. On the eastern edge of the clearing, a small Douglas fir had several branches arranged in an unnatural configuration. Someone had carefully bent them without breaking them, creating a pattern that looked almost natural, unless you understood how these trees normally grew. The branches pointed northeast, toward a ridge that rose above the tree line about 2 miles away. Marcus found the second clue 100 yards along the trail that led toward the ridge. A series of small stones arranged in a pattern that mimicked natural formation, but included one element that didn't belong, a piece of white quartz that wasn't indigenous to this area. The quartz was positioned to catch sunlight and reflect it toward a specific direction. Not northeast anymore, but due north toward a different section of the ridge. Kellerman was creating a trail that only someone with extensive wilderness experience would recognize. Each clue required understanding of how natural formations should look versus how they actually appeared. By the time Marcus found the fourth clue, a pattern of broken twigs that suggested animal passage but included details that no animal would create, he realized he was being led toward Tunnel Creek, a drainage that cut deep into the ridge about 3 miles from the main trail. Tunnel Creek was perfect for Kellerman's purposes. The drainage included several small caves and overhangs where someone could be concealed. It was far enough from marked trails that casual hikers never found it, and the terrain was difficult enough that conventional search methods would be ineffective. But Marcus knew Tunnel Creek. He'd explored it thoroughly during his ranger years, mapped every cave and overhang for search and rescue purposes. If Kellerman had Dr. Chen hidden somewhere in that drainage, Marcus could find her. He picked up his pace, following the faint trail that led toward the creek. The terrain became increasingly steep as he gained elevation, and the forest changed from the thick undergrowth of the river valley to the sparser vegetation of higher altitudes. At 11:30 a.m., Marcus reached the mouth of Tunnel Creek drainage. The creek itself was small this time of year, barely 3 feet wide, but the canyon it had carved was impressive. Nearly 50 feet deep in places, with rock walls that created numerous concealment opportunities. He paused at the canyon rim, studying the terrain below. Somewhere down there, Dr. Chen was hidden in a location that Kellerman believed only superior planning could have chosen. Marcus smiled grimly. Kellerman's psychological profile was accurate in some ways, but flawed in others. He had assumed that Marcus would rely purely on instinct and wilderness skills. He hadn't considered that a good tracker also learns to think like his quarry. Instead of descending into the canyon immediately, Marcus spent 30 minutes studying the drainage from above, looking for signs of recent activity. Kellerman would have needed to access the hiding place at least twice, once to prepare it, once to bring Dr. Chen there. Even someone with military training would leave traces. He found what he was looking for near a section where the canyon wall included a natural chimney formation that provided easy access to the bottom. Fresh scuff marks on the rock, a few fibers from dark clothing caught on a sharp edge, and most importantly, a single clear boot print in soft earth at the top of the descent route. Size 11, same lug pattern he'd seen in the clearing where Dr. Chen's beacon was found. Marcus descended into the canyon, moving carefully to avoid making noise that would carry in the confined space. At the bottom, Tunnel Creek was a series of pools connected by small rapids, with numerous alcoves and overhangs carved into the rock walls. He began a systematic search, checking each potential hiding place. Most were too small or too exposed to serve Kellerman's purposes, but 3 locations offered both concealment and defensible positions. Marcus found Dr. Chen in the second location he checked. She was in a natural cave about 8 feet deep and 5 feet high, hands secured behind her back with zip ties, mouth covered with duct tape, but alive and alert. When she saw him, her eyes widened with relief, and she made muffled sounds through the tape. Marcus approached carefully, scanning the area for any signs that Kellerman might be nearby. The cave showed evidence of preparation: a sleeping bag, water bottles, even a small camp stove. Kellerman had planned for Dr. Chen to survive here for some time if necessary. "Dr. Chen, I'm Marcus Reed, search and rescue. You're safe now." He removed the tape from her mouth carefully, then cut the zip ties with his pocket knife. "Thank God," she said, voice hoarse. "He said no one would find me. Said the forest would keep me forever." "Are you injured?" "No, just scared. He didn't hurt me. Just kept talking about proving something. Said he was conducting an experiment." She rubbed her wrists where the zip ties had been. "Is he gone?" "I don't know. We need to get you out of here, but carefully. He might still be watching." Marcus helped Dr. Chen to her feet, noted that she seemed steady despite her ordeal. "Did he say anything specific about his plans?" "He talked constantly. Said he was proving that planning and intelligence always defeat instinct and luck. Kept mentioning someone named Marcus Reed. Said he was going to demonstrate that even the famous tracker could be outmaneuvered by superior strategy." "How long have you been here?" "Since yesterday afternoon. He made me walk here from the clearing where I was collecting samples. Said he'd studied my research schedule, knew exactly when and where to find me." Marcus led Dr. Chen toward the cave entrance, but stopped before stepping into the open. Something felt wrong. This had been too easy. Kellerman had spent months planning this scenario, had demonstrated sophisticated understanding of both psychology and wilderness tactics. Would he really hide Dr. Chen in the first location Marcus would think to check? Dr. Chen, did he ever leave you alone here? No, he stayed nearby. I could hear him moving around, sometimes talking on a radio or phone. Why? Marcus realized his mistake just as Kellerman's voice echoed from somewhere above them in the canyon. Excellent work, Mr. Reed. 4 hours and 23 minutes to locate Dr. Chen. Faster than I anticipated, but not fast enough. Marcus pushed Dr. Chen back into the cave and stepped protectively in front of her. We found her. Game over. Actually, the game is just beginning. You see, locating Dr. Chen was only the first phase. Now you have to get her out of this canyon alive. A metallic sound echoed from the canyon walls, something heavy being dropped or thrown. Then another sound, and another. I took the liberty of preparing the drainage while you were following my trail, Kellerman continued. There are now several small explosive devices positioned at strategic points along your escape route. Nothing dramatic, just enough to seal the chimney you used to descend, block the lower exit, and perhaps cause a small rock slide or two. Marcus felt his heart rate spike. You're willing to kill us both to prove your point? I'm willing to escalate the scenario to test your abilities under genuine pressure. Dr. Chen will survive regardless. I've prepared an alternate exit route that only I know about. But you... Kellerman paused. You'll need to find a way out that your GPS unit and your radio can't provide. You son of a bitch. Language, Mr. Reed. Dr. Chen is a university professor. Marcus checked his phone. No signal in the canyon, as expected. His radio was also useless. The rock walls would block transmission. They were effectively cut off from any possibility of backup or rescue. What exactly do you want? Marcus called. I want to see if Marcus Reed is truly as good as his reputation suggests. Anyone can follow a prepared trail and find a stationary target. But can you navigate unknown terrain under time pressure, with a civilian to protect, while being actively hunted? Hunted? Phase 2 of our experiment, Mr. Reed. I will now attempt to prevent your escape using the same skills that made me effective in psychological operations. You will attempt to evade me using whatever wilderness expertise you possess. The winner is determined by whether you and Dr. Chen reach safety before nightfall. A small explosion echoed from the direction of the chimney route. Marcus knew without looking that their intended exit was now blocked. Dr. Chen, he said quietly, are you familiar with rock climbing? Some. I've done indoor climbing, a little outdoor sport climbing. How do you feel about free climbing in a potentially hostile environment? Before she could answer, Kellerman's voice echoed again from somewhere above them. One more thing, Mr. Reed. I should mention that I'm not alone anymore. Dr. Chen provided me with interesting information about your methods during our conversations yesterday. Based on her descriptions, I've adjusted my tactics accordingly. Marcus felt cold understanding wash over him. What did you tell him? Dr. Chen looked confused. I don't understand. I told him you were coming to rescue me. I explained how famous you are for finding missing people, how you never give up, how you can track anything. Her face went pale. Was I not supposed to? It's not your fault, Marcus said quickly, but internally, he realized that Kellerman now knew not just his general reputation, but specific details about his methods and psychology. The ex-military man had spent hours interrogating Dr. Chen about Marcus's likely responses to various scenarios. Dr. Chen told me about your tendency to take personal responsibility for civilian safety, Kellerman continued. She mentioned your reputation for never leaving anyone behind, never taking the easy escape route if it means abandoning someone in danger. Fascinating psychology, really. It creates entirely predictable behavior patterns. Marcus realized he was dealing with an opponent who had not only studied his professional methods, but also understood his personal psychology well enough to manipulate his decision-making process. She also mentioned your famous intuition about reading terrain and finding hidden routes, Kellerman added. I'm curious to see if that intuition remains effective when the terrain has been deliberately modified. Another small explosion, this time from the lower end of the canyon. Their second most obvious exit route was now blocked as well. Marcus studied the canyon walls, looking for alternative routes. The rock was solid sandstone, with enough holds for experienced climbers, but several sections looked unstable. Kellerman had obviously spent time identifying the most dangerous climbing routes and the safest ones. Dr. Chen, I need to ask you something important. When you were talking to Kellerman yesterday, did you mention anything about my background, military experience, specific training, anything like that? I told him you were former Forest Service, that you'd been involved in several famous rescues. I mentioned that people said you had an almost supernatural ability to find hidden routes through difficult terrain. She paused. Why? Because Kellerman was using her information to predict his moves, and Marcus needed to start thinking in ways that would surprise someone who thought he understood Marcus Reed's psychology. How's your endurance? He asked. Can you handle several hours of difficult hiking? I'm in good shape. I spend a lot of time in the field. Marcus made his decision. Instead of trying to climb out of the canyon, which is what Kellerman would expect based on Dr. Chen's description of his methods, he was going to follow Tunnel Creek downstream, deeper into wilderness that Kellerman wouldn't have had time to prepare. We're going downstream, he told Dr. Chen. It's going to mean several miles of difficult terrain, including some technical rock scrambling, but it should take us away from whatever traps Kellerman has prepared. Downstream leads into the Olympic Wilderness area, Dr. Chen said. There are no trails, no roads. We could get lost. Getting lost is better than getting dead. And I know this area. They began moving downstream, following the creek as it wound deeper into the canyon. The terrain was challenging, constant boulder hopping, occasional short climbs around waterfalls, dense vegetation that obscured their path. But Marcus felt confident in his choice. This route would require wilderness skills that no amount of military training and psychological manipulation could overcome. Kellerman might understand human behavior, but Marcus understood this specific landscape. After an hour of steady progress, they reached a section where Tunnel Creek joined a larger drainage that Marcus recognized. They were now in terrain he knew intimately, following routes he'd mapped during his ranger years. Mr. Reed. Kellerman's voice carried clearly despite the sound of rushing water. He was closer than Marcus had expected, probably following them downstream. Excellent tactical decision. Most people would have attempted to climb out immediately. Your choice to go deeper into wilderness terrain shows exactly the kind of counterintuitive thinking that made you successful as a ranger. Marcus motioned for Dr. Chen to keep moving while he paused to listen for Kellerman's position. However, the voice continued, you're now leading Dr. Chen into terrain that becomes increasingly difficult as it approaches the Quinault River drainage. Technical rock climbing, river crossings, several places where a single mistake could be fatal. The voice was coming from above them, probably from the canyon rim. Kellerman was paralleling their route but staying in position where he could observe without being seen. I know this drainage, Marcus called back. I've guided rescues through here before. Yes. Dr. Chen mentioned your intimate knowledge of Olympic terrain, but she also mentioned something else interesting. Your absolute refusal to put civilians at unnecessary risk. How far are you willing to push a university professor through dangerous terrain to avoid confronting me directly? Marcus realized this was another psychological manipulation. Kellerman was trying to make him feel guilty about the route choice, trying to create internal conflict between his desire to protect Dr. Chen and his need to evade capture. Keep moving, he told Dr. Chen quietly. Don't listen to him. They continued downstream for another hour, making good progress despite the difficult terrain. Marcus found himself impressed with Dr. Chen's hiking ability and her composure under stress. She followed his route instructions precisely, never complained about the difficulty, and moved with the sure-footed confidence of someone who spent serious time in outdoor environments. But as they descended further into the drainage, the terrain became increasingly technical. They reached a section where Tunnel Creek dropped down a series of rock shelves, creating a natural staircase that required careful climbing to navigate safely. Marcus went first, finding handholds and testing each move before committing his weight. Dr. Chen followed, moving more slowly but competently. They made it down the first two shelves without incident. On the third shelf, Marcus heard the sound he'd been dreading. Rockfall from above. Not natural erosion, but rocks being deliberately thrown or dislodged. "Move!" he shouted to Dr. Chen. She pressed herself against the rock wall, just as a basketball-sized stone bounced off the shelf where she'd been standing seconds before. "Sorry about that," Kellerman called from somewhere above. "Unstable terrain. You really should be more careful about route selection." Marcus looked up, trying to spot Kellerman's position but saw nothing. The man was staying well concealed while maintaining the ability to harass them with thrown rocks. "This is what I meant about escalation," Kellerman continued. "I'm not trying to hit you, just encourage you to move faster than is entirely safe. Psychological pressure applied through environmental modification." Another rock bounced down the cliff face, smaller this time but still dangerous. Marcus realized they couldn't continue this route with Kellerman shadowing them from above. Every technical section would become a potential death trap as long as their opponent maintained high ground advantage. "Dr. Chen, there's a side canyon about 100 yards downstream. We're going to make a run for it." They moved as quickly as safety allowed, with Marcus leading and checking each step before Dr. Chen followed. More rocks fell around them, but Kellerman seemed more interested in creating stress than causing actual injury. The side canyon provided the concealment Marcus was looking for: steep walls that blocked observation from above, and a route that led away from Tunnel Creek toward terrain he knew even better. But as they entered the side canyon, Marcus heard something that made his blood run cold. The sound of rappelling equipment, metal on rock, rope running through hardware. Kellerman wasn't just following them from the canyon rim, he was descending to their level. "Phase 3, Mr. Reed," came the voice, much closer now. "Direct pursuit. Let's see how well your wilderness skills work when you're being actively hunted by someone with comparable training." Marcus had been thinking of Kellerman as a psychological operations specialist who happened to have some outdoor skills, but the confidence in his voice, the ease with which he was moving through technical terrain, suggested more extensive training. "What's your actual background?" Marcus called. "Army Rangers before psychological operations, 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq. Specialized in deep reconnaissance and target acquisition in hostile terrain," which meant Marcus was dealing with someone who combined wilderness skills, military training, and psychological expertise, someone who might actually be better equipped for this kind of pursuit than Marcus had anticipated. "Why are you doing this?" Dr. Chen called out. "What do you want to prove?" "I want to prove that systematic preparation and superior planning always defeat intuition and improvisation," Kellerman replied. "Mr. Reed represents the pinnacle of intuitive wilderness skills. I represent the pinnacle of analytical tactical planning. This encounter will demonstrate which approach is truly superior." Marcus led Dr. Chen deeper into the side canyon, looking for terrain that would favor evasion over pursuit. The canyon narrowed as they climbed, eventually becoming a slot that was barely 6 feet wide in places. Perfect. Kellerman's military training would favor open terrain where he could use his equipment and observe his targets. In confined spaces, Marcus's intimate knowledge of the landscape would become more important than tactical training. "You made another mistake," Marcus called back toward Kellerman. "Explain." "You assumed I'd try to escape with Dr. Chen. You didn't consider that I might decide to hunt you instead." Marcus stopped moving and motioned for Dr. Chen to continue up the slot canyon. "Keep going," he whispered. "Stay in the narrow sections where he can't get a clear view. I'll catch up." "What are you doing?" Something he won't expect. Marcus began retracing his steps back down the slot canyon, moving silently on rock surfaces that wouldn't leave tracks. He'd spent the last several hours being reactive, responding to Kellerman's initiative. Time to change the dynamic. The slot canyon had several places where side passages led to hidden alcoves. Marcus chose one that provided concealment while offering a view of the main passage. Then he waited. Kellerman appeared within 10 minutes, moving carefully up the canyon with military precision. He was wearing dark hiking clothes and carrying a day pack that probably contained technical equipment. Medium build, maybe 5'10", moving with the controlled confidence of someone who'd done this type of pursuit professionally. Marcus let him pass, then slipped out of concealment and began following from behind. For the first time since this encounter began, Marcus felt like he was operating from a position of strength. This was what he'd done during his ranger years. Track people through difficult terrain, often people who didn't want to be found. Kellerman was good, but he was operating in Marcus's environment now. Marcus followed for nearly a quarter mile, staying far enough back to avoid detection, but close enough to observe Kellerman's methods. The man moved well, but he was focused on following Dr. Chen's tracks up the canyon. He wasn't expecting pursuit from behind. When Kellerman stopped to examine a section where Dr. Chen's footprints were unclear, Marcus made his move. Looking for something? Kellerman spun around, hand reaching automatically for something in his pack, but stopped when he saw Marcus standing 10 feet away, with hands visible and non-threatening. Mr. Reed, I have to admit I didn't anticipate this tactical reversal. That's your fundamental error, Marcus said. You've been treating this like a psychology experiment instead of recognizing that you're dealing with someone who might have his own agenda. And what agenda is that? I've been hunting people like you for 15 years. People who think wilderness areas are playgrounds for their private games. People who put civilians at risk to prove philosophical points. Kellerman studied Marcus with genuine interest. You're angry. I'm focused. There's a difference. Dr. Chen described you as someone who never loses his temper, who approaches every situation with professional calm. But you're clearly feeling personal animosity toward me. Marcus realized Kellerman was still trying to manipulate the psychological dynamic, still treating this as an opportunity to analyze behavior under stress. You're right. This is personal, because you've crossed a line that professional Forest Service doesn't prepare you for. You've made this about proving intellectual superiority instead of about Dr. Chen's safety. And yet Dr. Chen is perfectly safe. I've taken great care to ensure she comes to no harm. She's safe because I found her. Your plan depended on my success, not your restraint. Kellerman nodded slowly. Fair point, though I should mention that my contingency planning included several scenarios where you failed to locate her within the time limit. Such as? I would have found her myself tomorrow morning and become the hero of the story. Lone hiker discovers missing professor, leads her to safety. My psychological experiment would remain completely undetected. Marcus felt a chill of understanding. How many times have you done this? You're the first person to ask that question intelligently. Dr. Chen asked it, but in a way that suggested she expected a simple numerical answer. You're asking it because you've realized this methodology could be applied repeatedly. How many? 4 previous subjects over the past 2 years. All successful rescues, all grateful families, all cases that enhanced my reputation as a skilled wilderness volunteer. And all experiments in proving your theory about analytical planning versus intuitive skill. Exactly. Though you're the first subject who presented a genuinely challenging test case. The others were competent but not legendary. Marcus processed this information. 5 kidnappings over 2 years, all disguised as successful rescue operations. Kellerman had been operating a long-term research project using real people as test subjects. Where are the others now? Alive and well as far as I know. None of them ever realized they'd been part of an experiment. They remember being lost, being frightened, and being found by a skilled volunteer searcher. You drugged them. Mild sedative during the initial contact, just enough to create temporary amnesia about the kidnapping phase. By the time they were fully conscious, they were genuinely lost in terrain where I could find them heroically. Marcus understood now why Kellerman had been so confident about this encounter. He'd practiced his methodology 4 times, refined his techniques, learned from each experience. But you didn't drug Dr. Chen. Dr. Chen was never intended to be a simple test subject. She was bait for the real experiment, you. I needed her conscious and articulate so she could provide detailed information about your methods in psychology. Which meant Kellerman had been planning this specific encounter for months, possibly years. Marcus was dealing with someone who had made him a long-term target of study. What happens now? Marcus asked. That depends on you. I've proven my point about analytical planning versus intuitive skill. You found Dr. Chen faster than I expected, but you're now in a position where I control the tactical situation. Kellerman reached into his pack and withdrew a small device that Marcus recognized as a satellite GPS messenger. One button activates a distress beacon that will bring search and rescue helicopters to our exact location within 2 hours. Dr. Chen is retrieved safely. I'm credited with another successful rescue operation, and this encounter ends with my reputation enhanced. And if I don't agree to that scenario, then we continue the experiment under increasingly dangerous conditions. I have additional equipment cached in this area: night vision, technical climbing gear, even some items that could make Dr. Chen's situation considerably more threatening. Marcus realized he was at a decision point that Kellerman had carefully orchestrated. Accept the face-saving resolution where Kellerman emerged as a hero, or escalate to a level of danger that might result in Dr. Chen being seriously injured. You've thought this through very carefully. I've had 2 years to perfect the methodology. You represent the culminating test case. Marcus looked up the slot canyon where Dr. Chen was hidden, then back at Kellerman. One problem with your analysis. Which is? You're still thinking like this is a psychology experiment, but I'm thinking like this is a criminal investigation. Marcus pulled out his phone and held it up so Kellerman could see the screen. No signal down here, Kellerman said. True, but these phones have other functions besides making calls. Marcus showed Kellerman the screen, which displayed a voice recording app that had been running for the past 20 minutes. Everything you've said about your 4 previous victims, your methodology, your long-term planning, it's all recorded. When we get back to civilization, this recording goes to the FBI. For the first time since this encounter began, Kellerman looked genuinely surprised. You've been recording our conversation. I started recording when I realized this was more than a simple rescue situation. I've got your confession to multiple kidnappings, your detailed description of your methods, and your admission that Dr. Chen was used as bait. Kellerman stared at the phone for several seconds, processing this development. He paused. That's actually brilliant. I focused so intently on the tactical and psychological aspects of our encounter that I completely overlooked the legal implications. Your mistake was treating this like a game, instead of recognizing it as a crime scene. Yes, I see that now. Kellerman looked up the canyon toward where Dr. Chen was hidden, then back at Marcus. This creates an entirely different set of parameters for resolution. It means your escape scenarios all depend on my cooperation, which you're not going to get. Kellerman was quiet for nearly a minute, obviously recalculating his options based on this new information. Mr. Reed, I have to say, I'm genuinely impressed. Your tactical reversal was unexpected, but this legal maneuvering is inspired. You've transformed a situation where I held all the advantages into one where you control the outcome. Dr. Chen and I are walking out of here. You can come with us and surrender to the authorities, or you can run and become a fugitive. But your experiment is over. Actually, Kellerman said, there's a third option. He reached into his pack again, this time withdrawing something that made Marcus's heart race. A pistol. I should have mentioned that my contingency planning included scenarios where subjects proved more formidable than anticipated. Marcus stepped back, calculating distances and cover options. The slot canyon was too narrow for evasive maneuvers, and Kellerman was positioned to block the only exit route. You shoot me and Dr. Chen becomes a witness to murder. Dr. Chen is currently hidden in terrain where her body might never be found. 2 hikers lost in Olympic wilderness. Tragic accident. Another reminder of how dangerous these mountains can be. Marcus felt the tactical situation shifting back in Kellerman's favor. But he also noticed something that Kellerman might have missed. The echo. Their voices had been carrying clearly through the slot canyon, which meant Dr. Chen had probably heard everything, including Kellerman's current threats. Dr. Chen, Marcus called loudly. If you can hear me, activate your GPS emergency beacon. She doesn't have a beacon, Kellerman said. I removed it yesterday. Check your assumptions, Marcus replied. Dr. Chen's voice echoed from up the canyon. Already done. Signal activated 5 minutes ago. Kellerman's face went pale. That's impossible. I personally removed her emergency equipment. You removed her primary beacon, Dr. Chen called back. But I carry a backup personal locator in my boot. Standard safety protocol for solo researchers. Marcus smiled. Dr. Chen knows her safety procedures better than you researched them. The sound of helicopters was already audible in the distance. Kellerman looked at the pistol in his hand, then at Marcus, then up the canyon toward the approaching sound of rotors. 2 years of planning, he said quietly. Months of specific preparation for this encounter. Detailed psychological profiles, carefully chosen terrain, multiple contingency scenarios. And you lost to a backup GPS unit in a hiking boot. Kellerman laughed, actually laughed, with what sounded like genuine appreciation. Mr. Reed, you and Dr. Chen have provided me with the most educational experience of my career. I've learned more about the limitations of analytical planning in the past hour than in 2 years of previous experiments. He placed the pistol on a rock ledge and stepped back with his hands visible. I surrender to your superior tactics. The helicopters were getting closer. One question, Marcus said. Why did you really do this? The experiments, the kidnappings, the need to prove intellectual superiority over intuitive skill? Kellerman was quiet for a moment, listening to the approaching helicopters. Afghanistan, 2018. I was leading a patrol through mountain terrain similar to this. We had detailed satellite imagery, GPS coordinates, sophisticated intelligence about enemy positions. Everything planned perfectly. He paused. But our Afghan guide, illiterate man who'd never seen a computer, kept insisting we should take a different route. Said the terrain felt wrong, that the ridgeline above us was dangerous. I overruled him based on our superior intelligence and technological resources. Marcus waited. The ridgeline was an ambush. Half my unit was killed because I trusted technology and analysis over local knowledge and intuitive understanding. I've spent the past 4 years trying to prove that my decision was correct, that intelligence and planning should always override gut feelings and primitive instincts. And now? Now I realize I've been conducting these experiments to avoid accepting that I was wrong. That sometimes intuition and experience are superior to analysis and preparation. The helicopters were directly overhead now, probably landing in the wider canyon below. Mr. Reed, Dr. Chen, Kellerman called up the canyon. I want you to know that despite the criminal nature of my methods, this experience has provided me with insights that will help me become a better person. You've taught me something important about the limits of intellectual arrogance. Marcus heard voices and footsteps approaching from down the canyon. Search and rescue teams, probably followed closely by law enforcement. One more thing, Kellerman said. For what it's worth, your reputation is completely justified. You are exactly as skilled as the stories claim. Marcus nodded. Thank you. But next time you want to test a theory about human behavior, try using volunteers. The first search and rescue team appeared at the bottom of the slot canyon, followed immediately by sheriff's deputies with weapons drawn. Doctor, Sarah Chen? One of the deputies called. Up here, Dr. Chen replied. Safe. Marcus Reed? Here, suspect is in custody, no weapons, ready to surrender. Kellerman raised his hands as the deputies approached. Captain David Kellerman, retired, he said formally. I surrender myself to legal custody and confess to multiple counts of kidnapping and endangering civilians. As the deputies secured Kellerman and began the process of escorting everyone back to safety, Marcus found himself thinking about the psychological profile that had driven this entire encounter. Kellerman had been right about one thing. The encounter had tested Marcus's abilities against sophisticated preparation and planning, but he'd been wrong about the fundamental premise. This hadn't been a contest between intuition and intelligence. It had been a demonstration that the best solutions often combine both approaches. Marcus's wilderness skills had gotten them through the technical terrain and evasion sequences, but Dr. Chen's analytical thinking and emergency preparedness had actually saved them, and Marcus's legal awareness and tactical adaptability had prevented the situation from escalating to genuine violence. By the time they reached the helicopters, Marcus had reached a conclusion that he thought Kellerman would appreciate. Human beings are at their best when they combine intuitive wisdom with analytical intelligence, not when they try to prove one approach superior to the other. The sun was setting over the Olympic Mountains as they lifted off toward civilization. Dr. Chen was safe, Kellerman was in custody, and 4 previous victims would finally learn the truth about their rescue experiences. Marcus looked down at the wilderness below and felt something he hadn't experienced in the 3 years since leaving the Forest Service. Satisfaction with a job well done. Maybe it was time to stop running from what he was good at. Maybe it was time to come home to the mountains. Connor Walsh checked his watch. 6:47 a.m. The October air bit through his jacket as he loaded his pack into the truck, each piece of equipment finding its familiar place through muscle memory. 5 years since he'd left the Forest Service, but some habits died hard. GPS unit, first aid kit, emergency radio, water purification tablets, backup compass. The ranger station had called him at dawn about a missing hiker in Glacier National Park's northern sector. Sarah Chen, 28, environmental scientist, last seen 2 days ago near Hidden Lake Trail. Just like old times, he muttered, testing his radio one last time before heading out. The drive to the trailhead took 40 minutes through winding mountain roads, autumn maples bleeding red against the gray morning sky. Connor parked next to 2 Park Service vehicles and found Ranger Martinez waiting with a thermos of coffee and a worried expression. "Thanks for coming, Connor. We've got teams working the main trails, but Sarah's professor says she was researching off-trail water sources. That's your territory." Connor studied the topographical map, his eyes automatically tracing elevation changes and water patterns. Any sign of her equipment? Her car, fully stocked. No note, no indication of her planned route. Martinez handed him a photo. Smart girl, PhD candidate, experienced hiker. Not the type to make rookie mistakes. Connor pocketed the photo and shouldered his pack. "I'll start where the others left off. Check the drainage patterns east of Hidden Lake." The trail began normally enough. Well-worn path, occasional markers, the steady crunch of fallen leaves under his boots. Connor moved at his practiced pace, scanning automatically for signs others might miss. 30 minutes in, he stopped. Something felt wrong. Not the kind of wrong that came from obvious danger, but the subtle wrongness that had kept him alive during 5 years of solo backcountry work. The morning was too quiet. No bird calls, no squirrel chatter. Even the wind seemed muted. He knelt beside the trail and found it. A partial boot print in soft earth, Nike running shoe, women's size 7. Fresh, within the last 12 hours. "Sarah?" he whispered, photographing the print with his phone. The track led northeast, away from the marked trail and into thick timber. Connor followed, marking his route with orange flagging tape. The ground told its story clearly, purposeful stride, no hesitation, someone who knew exactly where they were going, except the direction made no sense. Connor stopped again, studying the topographical features around him. Sarah's track was leading directly toward a series of cliff bands and box canyons, terrain that would dead end within 2 miles. No experienced hiker would choose this route, unless they weren't choosing. He knelt beside another clear print and felt his chest tighten. Beside Sarah's Nike track was the partial outline of a larger boot, military-style deep tread, size 11 or 12. The spacing suggested someone walking deliberately close behind her. Connor reached for his radio. Static. He tried different channels, adjusted the antenna. Nothing but white noise. The radio had worked perfectly an hour ago. Standing slowly, he scanned the forest around him. Still that unnatural quiet. But now something else. The feeling of being watched. Not paranoia, not imagination. A decade of backcountry experience had honed his senses to razor sharpness. Someone was out there. He continued following the tracks, moving more cautiously now, staying off the obvious trail they'd left. Every 50 yards he tried the radio. Dead silence. The tracks led uphill through increasingly rough terrain. Connor found broken branches at head height, scuffed rocks, small tiers of fabric on thorny bushes. Signs of passage, but also signs of struggle. At 9:30 a.m., he found Sarah's water bottle. It lay beside a fallen log, cap missing, contents spilled. But the placement looked wrong, too visible, too convenient. Connor approached carefully, studying the ground around it without disturbing anything. The boot prints here told a different story. Multiple impressions, deeper than before. Sarah's tracks showed heel-to-toe drag marks. The military boot prints circled the area in a deliberate pattern. Someone had wanted the water bottle to be found. Connor photographed everything from multiple angles, then continued following the trail. His internal GPS told him they were heading toward Thunderbolt Canyon, a narrow gorge that would provide natural containment for... what? The answer came 20 minutes later. Connor crested a small ridge and looked down into a natural amphitheater of stone and timber. At the center, clearly visible from his position, stood Sarah Chen. Alive, apparently uninjured, sitting on a fallen tree with her hands in her lap. Waiting. Connor's instincts screamed danger. The setup was too perfect, too exposed. Anyone approaching Sarah would be completely visible from at least 6 different vantage points around the amphitheater's rim. He settled behind a large boulder and studied the scene through his binoculars. Sarah appeared calm, almost relaxed. No signs of restraint. No obvious distress. She was looking around occasionally, but not frantically. Not like someone who'd been lost for 2 days. Like someone who was waiting for something to happen. Connor tried his radio again. Still dead. He checked his GPS unit. Weak signal, coordinates drifting. His phone showed no service. All his communication equipment was being jammed. That realization hit him like cold water. This wasn't a simple missing person case. Someone with sophisticated equipment and detailed knowledge of the terrain had orchestrated this entire situation. And Connor was part of it now. He studied the amphitheater more carefully, looking for signs of the watcher he knew was there. The military boot tracks had disappeared on rocky ground, but Connor's experience read the landscape differently. Small disturbances in lichen patterns, microscopic scratches on stone surfaces, areas where pine needles lay just slightly wrong. There, a position at 2 o'clock from Sarah's location, elevated with clear fields of fire and multiple escape routes. Connor settled in to wait. His opponent was intelligent, patient, well-equipped, but Connor had advantages too. This was his territory, his element, and whoever was down there had just made a mistake. They'd revealed they knew he was coming. The question was, how? At 11:15 a.m., Sarah stood up. Connor watched through his binoculars as she walked to a specific tree, reached behind it, and pulled out a backpack. Not her pack. This one was military surplus, olive drab, much larger than anything a day hiker would carry. She opened it, removed something Connor couldn't identify from his distance, and held it up toward the tree line, toward Connor's general position. A mirror. She was signaling with a mirror. But not to Connor. To someone else. The return signal came from exactly where Connor had pinpointed the watcher's position. 3 quick flashes of reflected sunlight. Sarah nodded, replaced the mirror, and sat back down. Connor felt genuine fear for the first time in years. This wasn't a rescue situation. This was a trap, and Sarah was bait. But more than that, it was a trap specifically designed for him. Someone had studied his methods, predicted his response patterns, and orchestrated this entire scenario to bring him to this exact spot at this exact time. The only question now was why. He got his answer at 12:30 p.m. Connor was repositioning for a better view when he found the note. Pinned to a tree at eye level, directly in his path, was a piece of paper in a waterproof bag. Connor Walsh, former Forest Service Ranger, Glacier National Park, 2015-2020, backcountry specialist, search and rescue coordinator, 47 successful rescues, 0 fatalities. Your reputation precedes you. Sarah Chen is alive and unharmed. She will remain so if you follow instructions precisely. Any deviation will result in her immediate death. You are being tested. Proceed to coordinates 48.7596 degree on, 113.7204 degree W. Come alone. Bring only standard day hiking equipment. No weapons, no communication devices. You have 2 hours. Dr. Marcus Thorne Connor stared at the coordinates. He didn't need his GPS. The location was burned into his memory. Avalanche Creek Overlook, a narrow promontory with steep drops on 3 sides. Only one way in or out. The perfect kill box. But something else nagged at him. The name. Dr. Marcus Thorne. He'd heard it before, years ago, but couldn't place it. Connor cached his radio and GPS in a tree hollow, keeping only his basic hiking gear and emergency supplies. As he moved toward the coordinates, his mind worked the problem. Thorne knew who he was, knew his service record, had somehow accessed detailed information about his capabilities. This wasn't random. This was personal. But Connor had never heard of Marcus Thorne in any professional context. The answer came as he approached the overlook. Dr. Marcus Thorne, forensic psychologist, expert witness in the Blackfoot River murders, 2019. Connor remembered now. Thorne had testified that the suspect was stable, low risk, recommended minimum security placement. 3 weeks later, the suspect had escaped and killed a family of 4 before taking his own life. Connor had been part of the search team that found the bodies. The overlook appeared ahead through the trees, a rocky promontory extending over Avalanche Creek Gorge. Connor approached carefully, every sense alert. The natural acoustics of the location would make it impossible to approach unseen, which meant Thorne was confident in his position. Connor stepped into the clearing. "Mr. Walsh, punctual. I appreciate that in a professional." The voice came from behind a large boulder at the overlook's far end. Calm, educated, no trace of stress or emotion. Connor estimated the distance at 40 feet. Too far to rush, too close to run. "Dr. Thorne, I presume." Indeed. A figure emerged from behind the boulder, mid-50s, medium height, athletic build, wearing expensive hiking gear. He carried no visible weapons, but Connor noticed the tactical arrangement of his equipment and the calculated way he positioned himself. "Where's Sarah?" "Safe. Approximately 1 mile from here, sleeping peacefully. She consumed a mild sedative with her lunch. Voluntary, I assure you. She believes she's participating in a psychological research study on stress response. Which, in a way, she is." Connor studied Thorne's posture, looking for tells, weaknesses, opportunities. The man radiated confidence bordering on arrogance, but there was something else. Genuine intellectual curiosity. "What do you want?" Thorne smiled. "To answer a question that's plagued me for years. Are your abilities genuine or simply the result of experience and training?" "My abilities?" "Please, Mr. Walsh, your reputation in certain circles is quite remarkable. Tracking skills that border on supernatural, the ability to find people when electronic equipment fails, intuition that consistently outperforms statistical analysis." Connor remained silent, calculating distances, angles, escape routes. "The Jameson child, 2017, Thorne continued. Lost for 4 days, search teams combing 100 square miles. You found him in 6 hours, following tracks that 3 other rangers missed entirely. Lucky guess. The Morrison climbing accident, 2018. You located their position despite GPS failure and radio blackout, navigating 7 miles of unmapped terrain in complete darkness. Experience. The Chen family avalanche, 2019. You predicted the slide zone 2 hours before the official forecast, evacuated 12 people from the danger area. Connor felt cold settling in his chest. Thorne had done his homework. "That was the same weekend," Thorne continued, "that I was testifying about David Garrett's psychological profile, assuring the court he posed minimal public risk." The name hit Connor like a physical blow. David Garrett, the Blackfoot River killer. 3 weeks later, Thorne's voice dropped. Garrett escaped minimum security and murdered Rebecca Morrison, age 6, her parents, James and Linda, her baby brother, Thomas, 18 months old. Connor remembered. The search, the bodies, the systematic brutality. "Because I trusted psychology over instinct," Thorne said. "Because I believed data analysis was superior to human intuition. Because I was wrong." The pieces clicked together. "This isn't about Sarah. It's about testing your theory." "Exactly." Thorne's eyes gleamed. I've spent 4 years studying people like you. Individuals who consistently outperform logical analysis through apparent intuition. Sarah Chen was selected because her research pattern suggested she'd draw attention if she disappeared, specifically, your attention. Connor felt the trap closing around him. And if I don't pass your test? Then you weren't worthy of study in the first place. Thorne reached into his pack and withdrew a tablet computer. Your equipment failures weren't accidental. I've been jamming your communications, spoofing your GPS, monitoring your every move. But here's what fascinates me. You compensated perfectly. You navigated using landmarks, tracked by reading ground sign, found Sarah's location through pure deduction. Basic ranger skills. No, Mr. Walsh. Something much more interesting. Thorne activated the tablet, and Connor saw a real-time satellite view of the area. Multiple red dots moved across the display. Search teams, Connor realized. 12 experienced search and rescue personnel, Thorne said. Some with decades of experience, all equipped with the latest technology. None of them found Sarah's actual position. You did, using methods that shouldn't work in the modern age. Connor's mind raced. Thorne was too confident, too relaxed, which meant, you're not planning to kill me. Kill you? Mr. Walsh, you're the most valuable test subject I've encountered. Killing you would be wasteful. Then what? Thorne smiled, and for the first time, Connor saw the madness behind the intelligence. I'm going to break you. Systematically, scientifically, completely. I'm going to strip away your confidence, your instincts, your connection to whatever source provides your abilities, and then I'm going to study what remains. Connor moved, not toward Thorne. That was expected, planned for. Instead, Connor dove sideways toward the overlook's edge, rolling behind a cluster of boulders. The move bought him 5 seconds in cover from whatever weapons Thorne might deploy. Interesting choice, Thorne called out. Most people would have attacked directly. Connor peered around the boulder. Thorne hadn't moved, hadn't drawn a weapon. He was simply watching like a scientist observing a lab rat, but predictable in its way. You've identified this as a tactical problem requiring unconventional solutions. Your mind is working exactly as I hoped it would. Connor studied the terrain around him. The overlook was a natural trap, but it was also unstable ground. Avalanche Creek had undercut the promontory for decades. The entire structure was essentially a shelf of rock held in place by geological tension, and Connor remembered exactly where the weak points were. Tell me, Mr. Walsh, are you feeling that sensation yet? The certainty that you're missing something important? Connor froze. He was feeling exactly that. A growing conviction that Thorne's position, his confidence, his entire demeanor was wrong for someone in a tactical situation. You are, aren't you? That's your intuition trying to process information your conscious mind can't quite grasp. Thorne stepped into clear view, hands empty, posture relaxed. Here's what you're sensing. I'm not afraid of you. I should be. You're physically capable, experienced in dangerous situations, desperate to protect an innocent person. But I'm not afraid because I know something you don't. Connor's chest tightened. What? This isn't my first field test. There have been others, Mr. Walsh. 17 others, to be precise. People with unusual abilities, unconventional skills, remarkable intuition. The cold in Connor's chest spread outward. Would you like to know how many passed? Connor didn't answer. 0, Thorne said softly. Because the test isn't about succeeding. It's about understanding the exact point where intuition fails, where instinct becomes liability, where the human mind breaks under sufficient pressure. Thorne reached into his pack again, this time withdrawing a small device Connor recognized. A satellite communication unit, military grade. Sarah Chen was never in danger, Mr. Walsh. She's been safely sedated in a research facility 90 miles from here since yesterday morning. The woman you've been tracking, the bait you followed so skillfully, that was Dr. Jennifer Parks, my research partner. Connor's world tilted. Then who? No one is in immediate danger, but someone will be, very soon, unless you make the correct choice. Thorne activated the communication device, and Connor heard voices. Search team radio chatter. Team 3, we've got a lead on the missing hiker, heading toward Avalanche Creek Overlook. Copy that. ETA 15 minutes. Thorne smiled. 12 good people, Mr. Walsh. Experienced, well-intentioned, completely unprepared for what they're walking into. Connor felt the trap closing completely now. What are you talking about? Simple. The Overlook has been rigged with explosives. Carefully placed, precisely calculated. When the search team reaches this position, the entire promontory will collapse into the gorge below. Connor looked at the rock formation beneath his feet with new understanding. The slight vibrations he'd attributed to wind, the subtle shifting sounds. Unless, Thorne continued, you choose to save them. How? The detonation is triggered by a simple motion sensor. If someone moves into the blast zone, this entire overlook, the charges activate automatically. The only way to prevent the explosion is to ensure the sensor is activated before the search team arrives. Connor stared at him. You want me to trigger it myself? I want you to choose, Mr. Walsh. Trust your intuition about the nature of this situation, or trust the logical evidence I've presented. Act on instinct, or act on information. That's not a choice. That's murder. Is it? Perhaps I'm lying about the explosives. Perhaps the search team isn't real. Perhaps this entire scenario is an elaborate psychological experiment with no actual danger to anyone. Thorne held up the communication device again. Voices crackled through clearly. Team 3, confirm your position. We show you approximately 8 minutes from Overlook. Confirmed. Moving fast. Weather's turning, want to finish this grid before dark. Or perhaps, Thorne said, everything I've told you is absolutely true. And 12 people are about to die because you can't bring yourself to trust the evidence of your own senses. Connor felt his mind fragmenting. Everything he thought he knew about the situation had been systematically undermined. His instincts screamed that Thorne was lying, manipulating, playing psychological games. But the evidence, the voices, the satellite imagery, the careful orchestration of events suggested otherwise. What do you really want? Connor asked. To understand the exact moment when intuition becomes paralysis. When someone like you, faced with impossible choices and contradictory information, simply stops functioning. Thorne checked his watch. 6 minutes, Mr. Walsh. If the explosives are real, if the search team is real, if any of this is real, how will you decide? Connor closed his eyes, trying to center himself, to access whatever source had guided him through a decade of impossible situations. But for the first time in his adult life, he felt nothing. No guidance, no certainty, no clear path forward. Thorne had found his breaking point. 4 minutes. Connor opened his eyes and looked at Thorne with new understanding. You're not studying me. You're studying yourself. Thorne's confidence flickered for the first time. You want to know if someone with real intuitive abilities would make the same choice you made 6 years ago. Whether they'd trust instinct over evidence, even when the stakes were this high. Mr. Walsh, you had a feeling about David Garrett, a gut instinct that he was dangerous, that your psychological evaluation was missing something important. But you ignored it because the data said otherwise. Thorne's hand tightened on the communication device. And now you need to know if someone else, someone with proven intuitive abilities, would make the same mistake. Whether the failure was yours personally, or just human nature. 3 minutes, Thorne said, but his voice had lost its calm authority. Connor stood up, stepping fully into view. There's just one problem with your experiment, Doctor. What? You're not studying intuition, you're studying trauma. Connor began walking toward Thorne, slowly, hands visible. Everything you've told me, the explosives, the search team, the elaborate setup, it's all designed to recreate the psychological pressure you felt when you made your recommendation about Garrett. Stop moving, Mr. Walsh. But here's what you missed. Real intuition isn't about choosing between evidence and instinct. It's about reading the whole situation, including the people in it. Connor was 20 feet away now, close enough to see the sweat on Thorne's forehead despite the cold air. "And what I'm reading from you, Doctor, is a man who spent 4 years trying to prove that his failure was inevitable, that anyone with his abilities would have made the same choice. The explosives are real. Maybe, but you know what? It doesn't matter." Connor continued walking, "Because the one thing you can't simulate, the one element you can't control in your experiment is this. I'm not you." 10 feet. "I didn't fail to trust my instincts when it mattered. I didn't let 4 people die because I ignored what I knew to be true." 5 feet. "And I'm not going to let anyone else die while you work through your guilt." Connor reached for Thorne's wrist, and the doctor stumbled backward, directly into the motion sensor he'd positioned behind the boulder. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the overlook exploded. Connor felt the ground give way beneath his feet, felt himself falling toward the gorge below. But even as he fell, he was thinking, calculating, remembering the terrain he'd studied so carefully over the years. Avalanche Creek ran deep and fast below the overlook, fed by glacial melt and autumn rains. The water would be shockingly cold but survivable if he hit it right. Connor twisted in the air, positioning himself for impact, and struck the water with brutal force. The cold drove the air from his lungs instantly. The current caught him, tumbling him downstream over rocks and fallen logs. He fought to the surface, gasping, struggling to stay conscious as hypothermia began setting in. But he was alive. Connor dragged himself onto a gravel bar 200 yards downstream, shaking uncontrollably from cold and shock. Above him, smoke rose from the collapsed overlook. No sign of Thorne. His radio, cached in the tree hollow a mile away, would still be functional. The real search teams, if they existed, would need to know what had happened. Connor forced himself to stand, to start moving. Hypothermia was a bigger immediate threat than any psychological games. He needed shelter, warmth, and medical attention. But as he began the long hike back to civilization, Connor realized something had changed. The intuitive connection that had guided him for years felt different now, not weaker but clearer. As if Thorne's systematic assault on his confidence had somehow burned away layers of doubt and second-guessing. He thought about Sarah Chen, sedated in a research facility somewhere, believing she was part of a legitimate study. About the other 17 test subjects Thorne had mentioned. About the thin line between intuition and paranoia, between confidence and arrogance. 3 hours later, Connor reached the ranger station. Martinez took one look at him and called for medical evacuation. "Jesus, Connor, what happened? We lost your radio signal, found explosives residue at Avalanche Creek." "Long story. Is Sarah Chen safe?" "Sarah Chen? The missing hiker? We found her at the university this morning. Never left town. Apparently there was some confusion about her research schedule." Connor closed his eyes, feeling the last pieces click into place. "Any word on a Dr. Marcus Thorne?" Martinez checked his computer. "Nothing current. But there's an old file. Dr. Marcus Thorne, forensic psychologist, reported missing 4 years ago. Disappeared after the Blackfoot River trial. Presumed suicide." "Contact the FBI," Connor said quietly. "Tell them we found him." 2 weeks later, Connor sat in a conference room at the FBI field office in Helena, answering questions for the final time. The investigation had uncovered Thorne's elaborate research facility, his detailed files on 17 previous victims, and evidence of a systematic study of human intuition under extreme stress. Sarah Chen and the other victims had survived, but Thorne's body was never recovered from Avalanche Creek. "One more question, Mr. Walsh," Agent Morrison said. "How did you know? About the explosives, the deception, Thorne's psychological state?" Connor considered the question carefully. How did he explain the complex interplay of evidence and instinct that had guided his decisions? The way small details, Thorne's positioning, his emotional state, the artificial quality of the radio transmissions, had combined with deeper intuitive knowledge about human nature and trauma? "Experience," he said finally. "And the understanding that real intuition isn't about ignoring evidence. It's about seeing patterns that pure logic misses." Morrison nodded. "Would you consider consulting on similar cases?" Connor thought about the question for a long moment, about the responsibility that came with unusual abilities, about the danger of letting those abilities make him arrogant or careless, about the difference between trusting instinct and using it wisely. "Maybe," he said, "if you really need me." That night, Connor sat on his back porch, looking out over the valley below. The October air carried the scent of snow from the high country. Winter was coming early this year. His phone buzzed with a text message from Martinez. "New missing person case. Experienced climber disappeared near Glacier Point. Could use your help." Connor studied the message, then looked back at the mountains. Somewhere out there, someone needed help. Someone was lost, scared, possibly injured. And Connor Walsh had work to do. He picked up his pack and began checking his equipment. GPS unit, first aid kit, emergency radio, water purification tablets, backup compass. Some habits, Connor reflected, were worth keeping. So, Marcus always thought he knew every inch of that forest, until he found the cabin that didn't exist on any maps and realized someone was watching him discover it. He stood there on what should have been a familiar trail, staring at a wooden structure that simply shouldn't exist. Not in the official records of Glacier National Park, not on the topographical maps he'd memorized during his 3 years as a forest ranger, and definitely not there, in that specific spot where he was certain he'd passed at least a dozen times before. If you're into this kind of real account, hit subscribe because there's way more disturbing stuff coming. The feeling of being watched came like a wave of cold running down his spine. It wasn't paranoia. Marcus had learned to trust that kind of instinct during his years patrolling the Montana mountains. It was October 2021 and he was searching for Stella Hartman, a 24-year-old biology student who had disappeared 3 days earlier. But now, looking at that impossible cabin, Marcus began to suspect that Stella wasn't simply lost. 6 hours earlier, everything seemed routine. Marcus was sitting at the park headquarters drinking what was probably his 5th coffee of the day when he got the call. A student had lost contact with her university. Last known location, Logan Pass Trail. Equipment found, none. Clues, 0. Another tourist who thought Montana was a theme park, he had thought, grabbing the standard search and rescue gear, radio, GPS, first aid kit, ropes, and his favorite tactical flashlight. Nothing indicated this would be different from other cases. Marcus had a reputation in the park, not just for being efficient, but for finding things other rangers couldn't. It was kind of his personal superpower. He noticed footprints where others saw only dirt, detected tracks that seemed to have been erased by time or weather. His colleagues joked that he had eagle eyes, but Marcus knew it was more than that. It was like his mind processed microscopic details that went unnoticed by any normal person. Stella Hartman was different from most lost visitors. PhD student in botany, experienced with trails, proper equipment. Her advisor at the university said Stella was collecting alpine plant samples for her dissertation on plant adaptations at extreme altitudes. A serious researcher, not a reckless tourist. The first sign something was wrong appeared on the 3rd day of searching. Marcus was examining the area around Logan Pass when he found footprints. Not Stella's. He had already memorized her boot pattern from photos provided by her family. These were different. Military boots, size 11, with a wear pattern indicating tactical training. Weird, Marcus had muttered, kneeling for a closer look. The prints followed parallel to the main trail but keeping distance, as if someone was watching. That's when he noticed the tree markings. Deliberate cuts in the bark, made with a sharp knife. They weren't official trail markers. They were something else entirely. Marcus followed the markings deeper into the forest, moving farther and farther from known trails. This was where his special ability became crucial, where others would see only fallen leaves and branches broken by wind. He could identify the pattern of human passage. Nearly imperceptible footprints in moist earth. Fabric fibers caught on thorns. A drop of dried blood on a leaf, so small it could be mistaken for sap. The trail led Marcus straight to that impossible cabin. Now, standing before the wooden structure, Marcus felt his training conflict with his instincts. Protocol said to call backup, report the discovery, await instruction. But something about how the cabin was positioned, partially hidden by a rock formation with clear view of the main trail, screamed, "Danger!" He grabbed his radio. Static. Tried again. More static. "What the hell?" he muttered, checking the battery. It was full. The signal simply didn't exist. Marcus approached the cabin carefully, noting details that confirmed his growing suspicions. The wood was weathered but not abandoned. There were recent signs of occupation, fresh ashes near what looked like an improvised fire pit, a pile of empty cans organized too neatly to be casual trash. And then he saw the photos. They were nailed to the inside of the door, visible through a gap in the wood. Marcus felt his stomach drop as he recognized some of the faces, missing persons from the last 2 years, cases that had gone cold, cases where the bodies were never found. Stella Hartman's university ID photo was pinned right in the center. "Jesus Christ," Marcus whispered, instinctively reaching for his radio again. Still nothing but static. That's when he heard the voice behind him. "You know, most people would have turned around by now." Marcus spun around, his hand automatically going to the bear spray on his belt. A man emerged from the tree line, tall, probably in his 40s, wearing military-style clothing that had seen better days. His smile was the kind that never reached his eyes. "You must be the ranger they sent to find little Stella," the man continued, his tone casual, almost conversational. "I'm Clay, Clayton Mercer. And you, my friend, just made this whole thing a lot more interesting." Marcus's mind raced through his options. Run? Fight? Try to talk his way out? Clay looked like he knew exactly what Marcus was thinking and found it amusing. "Oh, don't worry about running," Clay said, as if reading his mind. "See, I've been watching you for the last hour. Very impressive tracking skills, by the way. Most people would never have found this place, but you've got a gift, don't you?" The way Clay said gift made Marcus's skin crawl. This wasn't a chance encounter. Clay had been waiting for him. "Where's Stella?" Marcus managed to ask, surprised by how steady his voice sounded. "Stella's fine. For now." Clay's smile widened. "She's part of a little game I like to play. See, I used to hunt animals, big game mostly, but after a while that got boring. Predictable. Animals are driven by pure instinct, but humans are interesting. They can think, they can plan, they can truly fear." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. "You're hunting people. I prefer to think of it as elevated hunting," Clay said, taking a step closer. "And here's the thing. I've gotten very good at it. 3 years, 12 successful hunts, and not one person has ever gotten close to figuring out my methods. Until you." The arrogance in Clay's voice was unmistakable. He was proud of himself, confident in his superiority, and that, Marcus realized, might be his only advantage. "You think you're clever, finding my little hideout," Clay continued. "But what you don't understand is that this is exactly what I wanted. You see, I've been watching you Rangers for months, learning your patterns, your protocols, your weaknesses, and you, Marcus, yes, I know your name. You're the best tracker in this park, which makes you the perfect final challenge." Marcus's hand slowly moved toward his radio again, hoping Clay wouldn't notice. "Oh, don't bother with that," Clay said with a laugh. "I've got a signal jammer running. Military grade. No one's coming to help you. It's just you, me, and the forest, the way hunting should be. What did you do to Stella?" "She's alive. Scared, but alive. I like to let them run first, you see. Give them hope. Makes the chase more satisfying." Clay's eyes gleamed with something that made Marcus's blood run cold. "But here's where it gets interesting. I'm going to give you a choice." Marcus said nothing, waiting. "You can try to run, like all the others did. I'll give you a 10-minute head start, and then I'll come after you. If you survive until dawn, I'll let both you and Stella go free. But here's the thing. No one's ever made it past the first hour. The casual confidence in Clay's voice was terrifying. He wasn't just arrogant, he was completely convinced of his own invincibility. Or, Clay continued, you can try to be a hero. Try to find and save little Stella first. But that means no head start. I start hunting you immediately. Your choice. Marcus felt time slowing down as his mind processed the situation. Clay was giving him options because he was certain the outcome would be the same either way. The killer had turned hunting into a science, and Marcus was just another test subject. But Clay had made one crucial mistake. He had underestimated exactly how good Marcus was at tracking. I choose option 3, Marcus said quietly. Clay's smile faltered slightly. There is no option 3. Sure there is. Marcus took a step back, his eyes scanning the ground around Clay's feet. I find Stella, get us both out of here, and make sure you never hunt anyone again. Clay threw back his head and laughed. You? You think you can outmaneuver me? Kid, I was hunting targets in Afghanistan before you even knew what a compass was. I've turned this forest into my personal hunting ground. I know every trail, every hiding spot, every... You left Stella somewhere close, Marcus interrupted, his special ability kicking into overdrive as he studied the subtle signs around them. Within an hour's walk, based on the wear pattern on your boots, and you came from... He pointed northeast. That direction. There's mud on your left boot that only comes from the creek bed near the old mining trail. Clay's expression shifted from amusement to interest. Go on. You're keeping her somewhere she can't easily escape, but where you can get to her quickly when you're ready to start the real hunt. My guess? The old mining cave's about 2 miles from here. Easy to secure, multiple escape routes for you, and acoustic properties that would muffle any screams. For the first time, Clay looked genuinely impressed. Very good. But knowing where she is and getting there alive are two very different things. Here's what you don't understand about me, Marcus said, backing toward the tree line. Everyone always focused on my tracking skills, but tracking isn't just about following, it's about understanding, and I understand something about you, Clay. Oh yeah? What's that? You're so confident in your abilities that you've gotten sloppy. Look at this cabin. You left it exactly where your vanity wanted it. High ground, good view, impressive to anyone who found it. But tactically, it's stupid. One way in, one way out, and you just revealed your position to your target. Clay's smile disappeared entirely. You little shit. You think you're... But Marcus was already moving, disappearing into the forest with a speed that caught Clay off guard. The killer stood there for a moment, staring at the spot where Marcus had been, his expression shifting from surprise to anger to something that looked almost like excitement. Well, well, Clay said to himself, pulling a hunting knife from his belt. This might actually be fun. Marcus moved through the forest like a ghost, every step calculated to minimize noise and maximize speed. His special ability was working overtime now, processing dozens of environmental details simultaneously. Broken twigs indicated Clay had indeed been moving toward the northeast repeatedly. Disturbed moss patterns showed heavy equipment had been transported in that direction. Even the way certain plants were trampled suggested a regular path to and from the mining trail. But Marcus also noticed something else, something that Clay's arrogance had blinded him to. The killer was good, but he was also predictable. All his movements followed logical tactical patterns. Military training was an asset, but it was also a limitation. Clay thought like a soldier, which meant Marcus could anticipate his next moves. The forest seemed different now that Marcus knew he was being hunted. Every shadow could hide a threat. Every sound could be Clay approaching. But instead of panic, Marcus felt a strange kind of clarity. This was what he'd been training for his entire career, even if he'd never realized it. He reached the mining trail in 23 minutes, using paths that weren't on any official map. The old mining operation had been abandoned for decades, leaving behind a network of caves and tunnels that most park visitors didn't even know existed. It was the perfect place to hide someone. Marcus found the first cave entrance and immediately knew he was right. Fresh footprints in the mud outside, recently disturbed rocks arranged to camouflage the opening. And something else. a faint sound from inside that made his blood run cold. Crying. "Stella?" he called softly into the cave entrance. The crying stopped immediately. Then a weak voice. "Help me. Please. Someone help me." Marcus felt his heart racing as he pulled out his flashlight. "Stella? My name is Marcus. I'm a park ranger. I'm going to get you out of here." He said no one would find me. He said he was going to... Stella's voice broke off in a sob. "I know. But I found you and we're leaving. Right now." Marcus entered the cave, his flashlight beam revealing a horrifying scene. Stella was chained to a support beam, looking dehydrated and terrified but alive. Around the cave were scattered the belongings of previous victims: hiking boots, backpacks, personal items that painted a grim picture of Clay's hunting history. "How did you find me?" Stella asked as Marcus examined the chain around her ankle. "I'm really good at finding things," Marcus said, pulling out his multi-tool. "And Clay made the mistake of underestimating me." The chain was secured with a military-grade lock, but Marcus noticed something Clay's arrogance had caused him to overlook. The beam Stella was chained to was old mining equipment, weakened by decades of moisture and rust. Marcus could break it. "This is going to be loud," he warned Stella. "As soon as I break this, we run. Can you walk?" Stella nodded, though Marcus could see she was weak. Marcus positioned himself and kicked the beam with all his strength. The old wood splintered with a crack that echoed through the cave. Stella's chain came free, and Marcus helped her to her feet. "Which way?" Stella asked as they reached the cave entrance. Marcus paused, his tracking ability working frantically. Clay would have heard that sound. He'd be coming, and he'd expect them to head back toward the main trails. But Marcus had noticed something during his approach. Another path, older and less obvious, that led toward a different section of the park. "This way," he said, leading Stella away from the obvious escape route. They had been moving for maybe 10 minutes when Marcus heard it, the sound of someone crashing through the forest behind them. Clay wasn't being subtle anymore. He was angry, and he was moving fast. "He's coming," Stella whispered, panic in her voice. "I know," Marcus said calmly, "but he's doing exactly what I expected him to do." Marcus had been leading them along a route that took advantage of every bit of natural cover available. More importantly, he'd been leaving a false trail, subtle signs that would suggest they were heading toward the park's main road. Meanwhile, their actual path was taking them toward something Clay couldn't possibly expect: the old fire lookout tower. It had been abandoned for years, but Marcus knew it still had one crucial feature: a functioning emergency radio system, hardwired to park headquarters, and immune to Clay's jamming equipment. They reached the base of the tower just as the sun was beginning to set. Marcus could hear Clay in the distance following the false trail he'd left. They had maybe 15 minutes before the killer realized he'd been fooled. "Can you climb?" Marcus asked Stella, looking up at the tower's ladder. "I think so." "Good. Get to the top and use the emergency radio. Tell them we're at the North Fire Tower and we need immediate backup. Tell them we have an active shooter situation." "What about you?" Marcus smiled grimly. "I'm going to do something Clay won't expect. I'm going to hunt the hunter." Stella started climbing and Marcus began preparing. Clay's military training was impressive, but it came with assumptions. Soldiers were taught to think tactically, to control territory, to use superior firepower. But Marcus wasn't a soldier. He was a tracker, and trackers had different advantages. Marcus moved away from the tower, creating another false trail that would lead Clay in circles. But this time he wasn't trying to escape. He was setting up an ambush. He found the perfect spot, a cluster of rocks that provided cover while giving him a clear view of the approach to the tower. Then he settled in to wait, every sense focused on the forest around him. Clay arrived exactly where Marcus expected him to, following the trail like a textbook pursuit. But instead of the desperate ranger he expected to find, Clay walked straight into Marcus's trap. "You know," Marcus called out from his hiding spot, "for someone who thinks he's such a great hunter, you're pretty predictable." Clay spun around, his knife ready, but he couldn't see where the voice was coming from. All those years of military training and you never learned the most important lesson about hunting, Marcus continued, moving silently to a new position. The prey sometimes fights back. "Come out and face me," Clay shouted, his earlier confidence replaced by frustration. "Why would I do that? You've got a knife and you're bigger than me, that would be stupid." Marcus was behind a different rock now, watching Clay spin around frantically. "But here's the thing about being a tracker, I don't just find things, I understand them, and I understand you, Clay. You don't understand shit. I understand that you chose victims who were alone and scared. I understand that you relied on them being too panicked to think clearly. I understand that your whole system falls apart when someone fights back intelligently." Clay was getting more agitated by the second, which was exactly what Marcus wanted. Angry people made mistakes, and I understand something else, Marcus continued. You're not as good as you think you are. You left evidence everywhere. DNA on Stella's chains, fingerprints on that cabin, a whole cave full of victim belongings. Even if you kill me tonight, you're done. "I'll disappear," Clay screamed. "I'll find new hunting grounds." "No, you won't, because I already called it in." Clay went silent, and Marcus knew he had him. "That's right," Marcus said. "Before I found your cabin, I managed to get one message through. Told them I was investigating a possible serial killer in the area. Gave them your description, your location, everything. Even if you kill me, they know exactly who you are and where to find you." It was a complete lie, but Clay didn't know that. "You're bluffing," Clay said, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. "Am I? Tell me, Clay. In all your planning, did you ever consider what would happen if your victim was smarter than you expected? If they could track better than you could hide? If they could think faster than you could hunt?" That's when Marcus heard it. The beautiful sound of helicopters in the distance. Stella had made it to the radio. Clay heard it too, and for the first time since Marcus had met him, the killer looked genuinely afraid. "Game over," Marcus said, stepping out from behind his cover. "Your move, Clay." Clay raised his knife, but the fight had gone out of him. He could hear the helicopters getting closer, could see the searchlights beginning to sweep the forest. His hunting ground was about to become a crime scene. "You think you've won?" Clay said desperately. "I know I have," Marcus replied. "Because I learned something tonight that you never figured out. The difference between hunting and murder is that hunters respect their prey. You never respected anyone, you just killed them." The helicopters were almost overhead now, and Clay made one last desperate decision. Instead of surrendering, he turned and ran deeper into the forest, still clutching his knife. Marcus let him go. Clay was running blind now, panicked and without a plan. The search teams would find him within hours. But more importantly, he was no longer a threat. Stella was safe. The authorities knew everything, and Clay's hunting days were over. Marcus made his way back to the tower, where he found Stella being checked over by paramedics. She looked up when she saw him approaching. He's done," Marcus said simply. "He can't hurt anyone else." They found Clay's body 3 days later at the bottom of a ravine about 2 miles from the tower. Apparently, running through unfamiliar forest in the dark while panicked wasn't the best survival strategy. The official cause of death was listed as accidental fall, but Marcus suspected Clay had realized he was cornered and made a final choice. The investigation that followed was massive. Clay's cabin yielded evidence connecting him to 14 murders across 3 states. His hunting journal detailed methods that would have made profilers sick, but most importantly, it led to the recovery of several other victims who were still alive, hidden in various locations across Clay's territory. Marcus stayed long enough to give his testimony and help with the investigation, but when it was over, he turned in his resignation. The brass tried to talk him out of it. After all, he'd just solved the biggest serial killer case in the park's history. But Marcus was done. He couldn't look at the forest the same way anymore. Every shadow reminded him of that night. Every sound made him think of Clay's voice. The mountains that had once been his sanctuary now felt like a hunting ground, where he'd always be looking over his shoulder. So Marcus packed up his life in Montana and moved to Texas. Different climate, different landscape, different memories. He found work as a private investigator, specializing in missing persons cases. Turned out his tracking skills translated well to urban environments. But the real reason he kept working cases like this wasn't about the skills. It was about the lesson he'd learned in those Montana mountains. Sometimes the most dangerous predator isn't the one with claws and teeth. Sometimes it's the one that looks human, but has forgotten how to be one. Marcus never went back to Glacier National Park, but he kept in touch with Stella, who finished her dissertation and became a professor. She sometimes sent him articles about plant adaptations in extreme environments, and he'd send back updates on cases he'd solved. They both understood something now that most people never learn. Survival isn't just about being strong or fast or smart. Sometimes survival is about refusing to let the monsters turn you into something you're not. And sometimes, when you're really lucky, it's about discovering that you're stronger than you ever knew you were. Marcus had spent years thinking his special ability was just about finding things. But that night in the forest, he learned it was about something much more important. It was about understanding the difference between hunting and being hunted, and knowing exactly which one you choose to be. If you know someone who works in remote areas, share this story with them. And if you want to hear more accounts like this one, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because unfortunately, there are more predators out there than most people realize. And sometimes the best defense is knowing that they exist.